Hey folks, so today I want to go through a number of steps that I just recently took as I was importing a new KitBash set that I just recently bought. A great set by this guy, let's see, his name is Oleg Ushenok. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a great set that he just built, 12 bucks or something like this. It's crazy cheap. And I just wanted to really quickly bring it in. Well, that quickly turned into a day or so as I worked through a number of challenges that I hadn't run into before, as I wanted to use TOPS, the task operator mechanism in Houdini, to bring in all those FBX files into a USD asset gallery. I wanted to show you kind of the problems I ran into and hopefully prevent you from running into those as you do something similar in your future projects. So with that, let's jump into it. Okay, so the first thing I did after buying the kit and unzipping it was I wanted to explore it. I wanted to see if there were anything I was going to have to do or any bumps in the road that I was going to have to deal with as I created a TOPS network to automatically import this into Houdini so I can ultimately create a USD asset gallery out of it. Okay, so what I did is I dropped into my geometry context here, dropped a geo, and immediately dropped a topnet network. Because what I want to do is I want to be able to click easily and quickly, click on the result in the work items. And as I do that, you'll see the models coming in. And this just gives me an easy way to kind of cruise through, look at the geometry spreadsheet, and kind of look for, just to see if everything's fairly consistent or not, okay? So let me jump into that topnet and show you how I set that up. So the first thing I do is I add a working directory to the local scheduler. And that's simply, and I just point at the kit directory clearly. And that's just so that I can establish the use of the underbar, PDG, underbar, dir, underbar. And I'll use that throughout all the tops. That basically, this expands to this working directory, okay? So then what I do is I create a file pattern, tops node, and I give it, I just want to bring in all the FBX files of the original kit. The way that this works is once you cook this, it will go and explore, find every FBX file and turn those into work items. And on these work items, you can see it has an output, and that's the file that that work item represents. This is good because I want to be able to go over and create, I then create an FBX file that has a PDG underbar output. So you put the ticks in, that's super important because this will expand if I click the mouse button. That expands to whatever FBX file I click here, okay? Now, all I want to be able to do is to easily and quickly explore the geometry and the kit itself, all right? So there's 64 FBX files that come with the kit, and I'm looking for patterns. And the first thing that I'm gonna notice here is that he did a really good job of naming all of his primitives. So in the geometry spreadsheet here, I'm looking at primitives and they're all named. Now, one thing that I noticed is on the buildings, which is like FBX file 1 through, I don't know, 44 or something like that, you'll notice that there's a pattern here where it's building 2 and then it's got all the pieces of it. And so what I want to be able to do is I just want this thing to be named building 2. I don't want all the other suffixes there. So I'm going to have to deal with that. And just keep that in mind. I'll basically just strip that off and give it the building 2 name. Okay, so that's the first thing I noticed. Now, as I started to go deeper into the kit, beyond the buildings, let's see, let me get into, I think, the props. So here's the first prop, okay? And you'll notice in this particular case, you know, he wasn't as consistent. He, being Oleg, the guy that built this kit, wasn't as consistent in terms of naming these per item. So meaning this should be in the resultant gallery that I want to create, the asset gallery. This should break down into 8 different FBX files. But even with a packed geometry here, I've got, you know, 385 primitives, which is no bueno. It needs to be 8. So I'm going to have to do something specific with that particular file. And so that particular file is props01 FBX. Okay. Turns out, luckily, that's the only one I'm going to have to do any kind of special processing with, because the rest of the prop files are actually already out of the box the way they should be. So you'll notice here, I've got 4 props. I've got 4 different names. That's great. If I come over here to the next one, I've got a bunch of different props, but they're all, there's like 67 of them here. Believe me, I went through and counted. So I went through here and just made sure that those were all consistent. So at the end of the day, what I'm going to be able to do is throw a geometry import top node against this, and then just parse it based on the primitive name, because each of these is a primitive and it's named, and then that will I'll be able to create an FBX file for each of these items, okay? So at this point, I have determined, after exploring through the kit, I've got 3 patterns that I've got to deal with. I've got to deal with the buildings themselves by, meaning I need to strip off this underbar suffix so that we have building 01s, building 02, and not the rest of it. So that's one. Then on that prop 1, I need to go into that prop and basically pack it again and give each of the new packs the proper name so that I don't come out the other end. Instead of, I want to come out the other end of this particular FBX with 8 new FBX files, not 385. And then the rest of the props, I just need to break up each of these individual primitives into its own FBX. Okay. So that's kind of like okay, great. So now I have my roadmap of what I need to do from a building up my TOPS networks perspective. Okay, so now that I know the 3 different operations I need to perform on the kit, I've created 3 different top networks. Now you could create just one network, but I wanted to break it out just to make it super clear what I was doing here. So the first one I'm going to jump into is the first kind of significant problem that I wanted to solve, which was breaking up all the individual props. So there was about 18 original prop files, FBX files, that I wanted to process each of those FBX files and break up each individual named prop into its own FBX file. And so that's what this top network is about. So let's jump into this. So what you have here is a file pattern top network who's designed to simply pull in the FBX files of the props. I basically pulled out all the prop FBX files from the original kit and put them in its own directory minus the first one. And that is what this file pattern is then going to go bring in. Okay. And so as I select this, you can see what those look like. So, again, in this particular case, each of these, I've got one FBX file, but I want to create 4 different ones as a result of this top network. Okay. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to pull this geometry import top node and have that process each of those FBX files that the file pattern found. And the way that this is going to work is it's going to go and point at a SOP node called generated BGEO for props, specifically the output node of that. So let's go look at that real quick. So go up and back out. So here is, I've created a SOP create, and inside that is that output node. And that's what that generate import is pointing at. All this is doing is creating an FBX skin import file, and I've pointed that at the PDG input. And if I expand that right now, it's not doing anything. If I go back up and go jump back into this top and select this work item, come back over, jump back in, and you'll now notice that PDG input now expands into that selected network. So if I come over here into my network here, there you see that file. So now if I come back over and I select each of these individual ones, you'll see that as a result of this particular node, it's pulling out each of those separate objects, those named objects, from each of the FBX files, okay? And it results in a 928 FBX files. So those 18 files explode into 928 BGEO files, okay? So as a result of this one top network, 928 BGEO files will be created. Where? Well, if you go over to the storage node, this is where that's happening. And I'm basically saying, hey, generate me a BGEO, expand the file name plus the PDG index into these individual files. So if I look at this entire, that's basically giving me I'm guaranteed a unique BGEO for each one of these FBX files that was expanded. Okay, so coming out of this TOPS network is a whole bunch of BGEO files in this directory. Now, the reason I'm doing that is so that I can grab the name attribute off the SOP geometry, off the primitive, and promote that into a name attribute on the TOPS network. So if I do the work item, check out this work item, notice now I have a name attribute on the work item itself, and that's pulled off of that named attribute primitive from the SOPs directory. Okay, that's the whole reason I'm doing that. Okay, and now I drop a ROP fetch, and this guy is going to go point at the generate FBX from geo ROP FBX file. So let me go up, jump into this guy, and in here I'm pointing at this ROP file. Now let's look at this a second, because this is basically doing the same thing, PDG input. I unpack it, I give it the material, I assign the material, I'm matching the size, I pack it again, and then I output the file, the FBX file, given that name and then the name of the primitive, okay? And then I make sure that I'm building the hierarchy from path, name it, I convert the units. I think that's the only thing I changed there, okay? So that's just a typical ROP FBX. So now I have a whole bunch of, as a result of that top network, I've got a whole bunch of props generated in the FBX directory. Okay, so now we've got all the props files manipulated except for the first one. So now let's deal with that first one. So I jump in here. The TOPS network itself is the exact same structure. So I've got a file pattern, which brings in just one FBX in this case, then a geometry import, and then a ROP fetch. And this is just an output. So the difference here is that I point at different SOPs to do the manipulation or the ROP manipulation with. So in this particular case, the geometry import, again, is going to create a bunch of BGEOs and extract the name. But it does that by going to a different SOP network. And that's the prop01 processing. The yup is my output there. I don't know why I call it that. But anyway, I would jump in here, and that's this network. So I point at this prop01, looks like this. And then what I do is I go through each of these attribute wrangles. I select a group, which is basically selecting all of these guys, and then naming it. Okay? And you'll notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those wrangles. It's just selecting those different chunks in order to name them appropriately. And then for each of those pieces, I pack it and I give it a name. So I set the name. I don't create packed fragments. This is not an RBD sim. And I transfer the name. Okay. So you come out the other end with 8 primitives, all properly named. So now I'm going to have 8 BGEOs coming outside of this ROP. Then all I'm going to do is in this ROP fetch, I'm going to go to the same prop01 processing, except a different SOP. So in this particular case, I need to generate out the FBX file from each of those BGEOs. So in this particular case, I point at this one, and that brings in exactly the same thing that we did before. And now I've got an FBX for each of these objects. All right, now after all that pre-processing, now I've just got a list of new FBX files. I've got a lot of them. In fact, it turns out I've created like over 2,000 FBX files as a result of breaking up that original set of 64 FBX files. And now I want to generate a USD component out of each of them. And that's what this top network's for. So if I jump into this one, I basically do the exact same thing, file pattern. I'm looking at my FBX file of all the new generated FBX, and I'm recursing because I created an FBX file plus a props directory for each of those. And that creates, there's 2,152 FBX files, okay? Then I create a USD, a ROP USD output, and I point at the component output one LOP node. And I don't believe I changed any other, there's nothing else that I changed here other than a reload param, which I don't think you actually is required. I did that out of an abundance of caution. So if I jump back up here and I jump into this component here, this is the component that is actually generating all the USD. So if I come up here, you'll notice that I'm pulling the geoName. Actually, let me jump into the component geometry. So if I dive in here, it brings in the FBX, and again, PDG input. So it's expecting a FBX file. It unpacks it. I run an attribute wrangle, and this is where I deal with the first problem that I talked about, which is the building names had that building underbar 01 underbar a bunch of numbers. And this is where I handle that. I'm looking for, hey, is it a building? And if it is, then I pull off those last bits. Otherwise I don't. So for all the props, I don't want to change the name of the props. They were all named appropriately. So only if the first 4 letters were BUIL, then I strip off the last 4 characters, and that becomes my name. Okay, so that's what that wrangle does. Then I just promote that attribute to a detail attribute called geoName. Okay, and I use that up here on the component output node. So the root primitive becomes, I just pull the detail, that detail geoName, that detail attribute, I pull that off, and then all of these are just basically building off of that. Okay, with one exception. I do create I need to make sure that all of these USD files are unique. And so I pull off the directory, I split it, and pull off and use the last part of the directory attribute off the tops directory in order to build this. And it basically turns into something like this, the primitive extract, whatever my folder is that I'm putting those USDs in, okay? And that's it. And that's what generates out all the USDs. Now, I did all this work in order to create a new asset library. And the way that I did that was by simply going into if I open up the Solaris layout asset gallery. So this is the result of me adding all to the gallery. Now, what you'll need to do is you'll want to create a new database. So you simply come here and you say, create new asset database file, give it the location and the name that you'd like. And then you would click this button to give it the directory where your USD assets were created from. You point it at that one directory. So in my particular case, it's going to be USD, and click OK. And that will create a thumbnail for every USD file created. Okay. For me, this took a while. Okay. A few hours, because it actually rendered a thumbnail for every one of those USD files that I created. But that's it. Then you have that database there, that gallery. And the reason that's so interesting is I can come over here and create a stage manager, right? Bring up the graph here, bring in that gallery. It makes a little bit more room here. And I can just drag and drop the building just like that into my scene. And so what you'll start to see is buildings here. So now if I wanted to make, let's say I wanted to have a buildings folder, and I put that guy in there, and then I can drag, let's drag another building over into the buildings, and you'll see I can start to build up and manipulate these items to my heart's content and build up a complete new scene. Maybe I drop a Karma physical sky here to actually get something interesting happening. Turn on Karma. Maybe manipulate the sky a little bit, make that a little brighter. Okay. But now that I have this asset gallery, I can just, start throwing in all kinds of different props and etc. That's the whole purpose in doing this, is now you can do whatever you want to do here. Okay. But in this particular case, I did want to run into one other problem. And that problem was the fact that because Oleg did such a great job of creating a number of modular pieces, in many of those FBX files, he reused some of the smaller props. So you notice here a lot of these like boxes and things of this nature. Well, it turns out if you did all the steps that I ran into, if you bought this kit and ran through all the steps that I just went through, you're going to have a bunch of duplicate objects in your asset gallery. In order to easily deal with the duplicates, an asset gallery in Houdini is just a SQLite database file. All right. So what you can do is you can go pull down like DB Browser, which is a SQLite IDE, and open up your database. Here, I'll open up my recent database and basically execute. Let me open up, let's see. Let me open up the SQL file that I saved to show you what you need to do to fix all the duplicates. So if I execute this SQL, you'll notice I don't have 0 rows were returned. Okay, that's because I've already done this part. And all this is doing is saying, hey, go through the database, find where I've got duplicates based on the name and delete them, and then save it back out. And that's it. And this is, it's not like I'm a SQL expert. This is ChatGPT to the rescue right here. And that's it. And now you've got a brand new asset gallery based on this kit, and it's ready to go.